The man sits calmly beside a corpse and claims he's never seen it before. Welcome to Detective Noir. I am your host, Daniel Mercer. Tell me where you're watching. Franz, I love seeing this community grow. Your comments make this journey unforgettable. Let's dive in. It was upon one of those London mornings when the fog seems to have settled like wet, felt upon every window and sooty cornice that I found myself once, more in the familiar armchair at Baker Street, with my friend's violin idle upon the table and a curl of Turkish smoke hanging. As if reluctant to disperse beneath the ceiling roses, Holmes was stretched at length upon the settee with his eyes half closed, his long fingers steepled, and an expression upon his lean, aquiline face which any man but I would have mistaken for a doze. I had learned, however, that in such intervals he was most awake. "You will spoil the page if you press harder, Watson," said he without stirring. I glanced down, startled, at my notebook. "My dear Holmes, I'm not writing, merely turning it over in my hand." "Exactly so. The leaf before you carries the ghost of a penciled word, Ebury, formed by pressure through a page since torn away. You would not have noticed it, but the outline is there. Its owner wore kid gloves when he wrote it and sat where you now sit." "Holmes," I protested, laughing, "you tax my credulity beyond—" A brisk step upon the stairs spared me further argument. Mrs. Hudson announced Inspector G. Lestrade of Scotland Yard, whose narrow figure and bird-like brightness of eye were as well known to us as the small, decisive cough with which he preceded important sentences. He came in with the air of a man who carries news which will bear handling only by practiced fingers. "Morning, Mr. Holmes, Doctor," he bobbed to each of us. "I've a case that is peculiar even for London." Holmes's eyelids lifted. "Pray be seated, Inspector. You have been to Pimlico already, I perceive, and the clay at your heel is not from Baker Street, but you come now by way of Whitehall, evidenced by the smut at your cuff and with a farewell from a restless cab-horse that prefers the left trace to the right." Lestrade's mouth made a thin line which might equally have signified irritation or admiration. "Heaven help me, I shall never grow used to it." "Yes, Whitehall. Yes, Pimlico in the small hours, and a hansom whose driver talks more than is healthy. The case, Mr. Holmes, a gentleman is dead, and a stranger sat beside him as if keeping company with the corpse." Holmes's fingers unlocked, and his long figure came upright, the languor dropping from him as a cloak slides from a peg. "Details, if you please." Lestrade took a folded copy of the morning edition from inside his coat and tapped a column which had been hastily set in smaller type. "They will have it by noon and cause a sensation, unless we are wise. At 3:05, a constable upon early beat in Eccleston Square observed two men seated upon a bench under the south plane tree. One, being nearest the path, appeared to be reading a newspaper. The other, older, was at his side, tilted somewhat as if asleep. The constable passed them twice. The first time the reader gave him no more heed than to turn a page. The second, he noticed that the older man's head had fallen too far back for comfort. He approached. The reader rose and said, "He is unwell," and then, according to the constable, walked away in a composed manner. By the time the constable reached the bench, the older man was dead. "The reader has not been seen since, cause?" asked Holmes. "That is the devil of it. We have the divisional surgeon's first opinion only. No wound, no obvious sign of poison. The lips a little discolored, but that may be the cold. A faint smell, well, he says perhaps of camphor, perhaps not. The dead man's name is Mr. Albert Selby, a commission agent, lived in Ebury Street. You may recall that you once had business with a Selby who dealt in South American lines. Could be the same man." "I do not know. He was decently dressed, watch and money undisturbed, letters in his pocket consistent with business engagements yesterday evening." "And the stranger?" said Holmes. Lestrade's bright eyes narrowed. "You may imagine the Yard's appetite for him. The constable describes a gentlemanly person, 30 to 40, clean-shaven save for a small moustache, foreign-cut coat, turned collar up against the damp, gloves on. He spoke in the plainest English. Height average. Nothing remarkable save that he never once looked at the constable full on, but kept his gaze upon the pavement as if he were ashamed. He departed toward Chester Street. That is all." Holmes rose and moved to the window, parting the curtains with 2 fingers and letting the grey day paint his profile in spare strokes. "A man sits beside the dead," he murmured. He does not flee when the policeman approaches, nor show the agitation of guilty conscience. He announces illness, not death, and leaves at a measured pace. We may dismiss, therefore, the common run of murderer. He would have chosen solitude or speed. He may be a confederate, said Lestrade, kept watch lest anyone should notice. The other man was already dead, and he stayed to complete some business of the pockets. Yet the pockets were not rifled. Precisely. Holmes turned. You have searched for traces on the bench. Sanded and swept already, Lestrade replied, a trifle defensive. We took the slats to the station. Holmes's nostrils dilated the merest shade. He forbore the comment I could see formed upon his lips, and the newspaper that our stranger read. Its title? Its state of damp? The constable cannot say. He is a good lad, but he thought no harm in a gentleman reading in a square at 3 in the morning. He only noticed that the reader folded it under his arm as he left. Holmes moved lightly about the room, the springs of the carpet not so much sounding as confessing to his steps. He paused at the mantel, where a small dab of amber had once dripped from Mrs. Hudson's beeswax. He examined his cuff, then looked with sudden brightness toward the hearthrug, where a minute ash, pale and conical, had fallen near my boot. You have taken snuff this morning, Lestrade, he observed. I? Never. Then our visitor before you— Ah! He stooped with a cry of satisfaction and lifted upon the blade of his penknife a slender thread of grey-blue fibre. And our visitor wore a coat of Saxony cloth, not new, and had recently leaned against a painted balustrade. The paint is ultramarine, of a sort used more commonly upon interior wood than exterior. You will say, Watson, that I build castles upon a filament. But in London a filament can be a flag. Well, said Lestrade, drumming his fingers upon his hat-brim, will you come, Mr. Holmes? With all the pleasure of a convalescent upon being told that his favourite vice is suddenly good for him, Holmes returned. Watson, your coat. We shall go first to Ebury Street. A dead man's rooms are often more conversational than his acquaintances. He had his ulster upon his shoulders and was reaching for his stick when he paused by the table and, almost idly, set 2 fingers upon the spine of my notebook. Ebury, said he softly. It is curious how the city will whisper a name in 10 places before one learns to hear it. We found a cab and clattered into the milky air, which smelled of the river, as it often does before noon. Holmes, who could be as silent as a tomb when his mind was engaged, tapped thrice upon the ceiling with the ferrule of his stick, a trick I had learned signified approval of some internal arrangement. He spoke once only, and then to the horse, as if the poor beast had the power to amend the facts. Ebury Street, when we reached it, was not yet astir beyond a milkman and a maid, scrubbing steps with her sleeves tucked to the elbow. Number 47 presented a decent face to the world. Curtains pulled, knocker polished, a narrow strip of garden where rainwater gathered in a small iron trough. A clerkish young man met us at the door, his eyes rubbed pink with fatigue. Mr. Selby's rooms are upstairs, he told Lestrade. I am Mr. Calthorpe, his confidential assistant. Mr. Selby never came home last night. I understand there was— He swallowed and could not finish. Holmes's gaze flicked over the hall table, an umbrella stand which bore upon its rim a smear of dull blue, a fresh dent in the mahogany where some heavier object had struck. And upon the floor, half hidden by the skirting, a flattened twist of brown paper, such as is wrapped about apothecaries' files. Your employer was a temperate man? Holmes inquired. Very. He suffered of late from a touch of ague. He carried smelling salts. But he drank only tea. He was to meet last night with a foreign gentleman upon business of a concession, Chilean, I believe, or Peruvian. The gentleman sent a note to say the hour must be later than intended, 11 instead of 9, and that the place should be the square rather than the office, the air being better for Mr. Selby's complaint. Ah, said Holmes. He turned the twist of paper with his stick, and without touching it, read an imprint of letters upon the inner skin where some label had pressed. Forty Camp. The fragment was enough to send a little shiver through me, who had seen deaths too plain to love ambiguous vapours. Lestrade had seen it also. Camphor. The surgeon mentioned a smell. Camphor does not kill a man in a public square by friendly suggestion, Holmes returned. But there are oils that are cousins to it. And there are hands that know how long to let a patient sleep. Mr. Calthorpe, your master's correspondence, if you please, and his hat and walking stick of last evening. While the clerk rummaged, Holmes moved through the little sitting room with a light that was almost gaiety. He bent at the writing desk, sniffed a burnt scent from the wick of the lamp, and pointed me to a minute tideline of blue upon the inner lip of the window rail, where someone had rested a damp object and lifted it too hastily. "You observe the paint," he said. "Ultramarine, the same that our anonymous caller wore upon his sleeve. There is a handrail somewhere newly painted, upon which our stranger leaned before he came here. He is precise, Watson. He rests where a tidy man rests. He folds a newspaper in a manner that does not drip upon his gloves. He sits by the dead as if to chaperone them past scandal. That is not our common criminal," Lestrade snorted. "It is also not our common angel. Here, what of this?" He had found among the papers a short note upon coarse foreign stationery. "Sir, the air will do you better than account books. If you will oblige me, I shall meet you under the south plane tree of Eccleston Square at 11 of the clock. We have but 10 minutes' business." "How the south plane tree?" said Holmes, smiling in a thin line. "He is punctual even in his botany." "And for what?" I asked. For what indeed? Holmes tucked the note into his pocketbook. "Now, Mr. Calthorpe, Mr. Selby's hat." The hat, soft felt, decent quality, bore upon its inner band a faint pallor as if of talc, and upon the brim a smear, not blue but a paler tint, almost chalky. Holmes took out his little glass, whistled, and then, to my amazement, put the hat to his nose as a vintner might a delicate claret. "Oil of cassia," he murmured. "And yes, something sharper beneath. Our stranger is fastidious to a fault. He carries a preparation upon his gloves that leaves no perspiration, and a scent that clothes itself as camphor to the inattentive. Lestrade, you will be so good as to have the bench slats from the station sent to my rooms by noon. And I shall want the constable who witnessed the interview. We will look at his memory before the evening papers look at ours." Lestrade glanced from the hat to Holmes and back again. "You think the stranger is not a murderer, then?" "I think," said Holmes, "that he is either the kindest man in London or the most deliberate. It will be my business to discover which." He gave a quick, almost mischievous look to me, the look he wore when the music was about to begin after a long tuning of strings. "We shall next pay our respects to the South Plane Tree, Watson. There is a peculiar society in London that will sit with the dead. It may be that our stranger belongs to them, or it may be that he invented the custom for one very particular night. As we descended," Holmes paused at the stairhead and touched with his stick the banister, where the paint had dried to a dull sheen. A single perfect fibre of Saxony cloth adhered to it, caught in the fresh coat and gleaming faintly blue. "Ebury," he said again, half to himself. "Eccleston, a plane tree and a gentleman, who does not meet the eyes of policemen. Come, Watson." The fog is the colour of ultramarine when it takes to the lungs, and with that curious, cold exhilaration which only a new puzzle could produce in him, he swept into the street, drawing the London day into his chest, as if it were a draught of some keen, invisible stimulant, and I followed, already marshalling in my mind the scattered, contradicting trifles which, if I have learned anything, my friend would presently lay in a line as straight as a gun barrel. From the South Plane Tree to the man who sat beside the dead, the cab drew up to Eccleston Square with a rattle of wheels, and the hiss of the horse's breath in the damp morning air. The fog still hung about the trees, though thinner now, and it lent a certain ghostly pallor to the scene. Holmes descended briskly, his eyes sweeping over the railings, the gravel path, and the benches with a rapidity that betrayed the keenest attention. I followed, still dwelling upon the strange note and the image of that stranger, who had sat in such unnerving composure beside a corpse. "There, Watson," Holmes said, pointing with the ferrule of his stick, "the South Plane Tree. Observe the bench beneath it. Do you see nothing unusual?" I strained my eyes, but to me it was only a common wooden bench, its slats darkened by the night's damp. "Nothing that another eye might not see," I admitted. Holmes smiled faintly and bent closer. "Your humility does you credit. See here. The grain of the wood bears two distinct impressions. One, a deep crease where a heavy man sat with his weight leaning back. The other, lighter, more precise, as though the sitter held himself with deliberate restraint. And note this, what remains upon the right-hand slat." I bent down and noticed at last a faint powdery residue. Holmes touched it with the tip of his glove and brought it to his nose. "The same preparation as upon Selby's hat brim," he murmured. An aromatic oil disguising itself as camphor. A curious affectation, Watson, hardly the habit of a careless fellow. As he straightened, the constable who had first discovered the men approached us, cap in hand, with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Holmes questioned him with a precision that allowed of no vagueness. The man repeated what Lestrade had already told us, but under Holmes's quiet prodding, small new details emerged. The stranger had folded his newspaper with exactness, sliding it under his arm so that no page fluttered. His voice, though polite, carried a faint hesitation before each word, as if he measured them carefully. And, most curious of all, he never once looked full upon the constable, keeping his eyes a little lowered. "Very good," said Holmes. "And tell me, when the gentleman rose, did he leave anything behind upon the bench?" The constable frowned. "Now you mention it, sir. I did think there was a scrap like tissue paper caught under his heel, but when I bent a moment later it was gone. Perhaps the wind carried it." "Perhaps," said Holmes, though the tone suggested another explanation. He drew me aside as Lestrade barked a few further questions of his own. "You perceive, Watson, that our stranger's conduct is deliberate in every respect. He sits by the dead not in fear but in intention. He chooses a bench in darkness, folds his paper as a man folds away an hour of waiting, and walks at the measured pace of one who has nothing to hide. That is not accident, it is strategy." I could not help but shiver. "Then you believe he knew Selby would die at that hour?" "I believe," Holmes replied, "that he expected it and perhaps ensured it. But to what end and by what mechanism, we have yet to learn." He moved suddenly toward the gravel path, stooped, and lifted a small fragment of blackened matchstick. "Struck upon a surface not rough enough for it," he mused. "See the faint scrape at the edge? A man might strike so if he wished light without fire, sound without flame. A signal, Watson. A signal between two men, one now dead." At that moment Lestrade joined us, impatience plain upon his features. "Well, Mr. Holmes, have you solved it already?" "The Yard cannot chase phantoms all day." "On the contrary, Inspector," Holmes said with a glint of humour, "phantoms often leave the most distinct footprints. You will oblige me by having inquiries made among Selby's business associates, particularly any from South America. Mr. Calthorpe spoke of a concession involving Chile or Peru. It is there we must look for the motive. And you, Mr. Holmes?" "I," said my companion, "shall call upon a man who knows the difference between cassia oil and camphor, and who sells one under the label of the other. It is not far from here to a certain apothecary who prides himself on exotic distillations. Come, Watson. The trail is fresher than the Yard supposes." We left the square, the fog parting reluctantly as the sun strained through. I walked beside him, my mind still wrestling with the puzzle. "Holmes," I said at last, "do you truly think the stranger is our culprit?" He gave a short laugh. "Culprit, Watson? That is the common word, but in this case I am not certain it applies. He may prove to be the agent of death, or its witness, or its avenger. Until I have examined the chemistry of that residue, I shall reserve judgment. But this I will say, any man who can sit beside the dead in composure and depart without haste or concealment is not ordinary flesh and blood. He is something rarer and perhaps more dangerous." With that he hailed a cab, and we were soon rattling toward Victoria Street. Holmes leaned forward, his long fingers drumming upon his knee, his eyes alight with the anticipation of a mind moving closer to its quarry. And I, as ever, felt that mingled awe and unease which came whenever I glimpsed the strange workings of his genius that saw murder not in the clang of pistols or the flash of blades, but in the faint smell upon a slat of wood, the fold of a newspaper, and the silence of a man who would not meet another's eyes. The apothecary's shop lay in a narrow by-street off Victoria, a dim little establishment where the air was rich with mingled odours of herbs, oils, and the faint sweetness of dried petals. Holmes pushed open the door without ceremony, and a small bell tinkled above us. A man of middle years, spare in frame and with a shrewd, pinched expression, emerged from behind the counter. He greeted Holmes with the deference of one who knows that his visitor's scrutiny may not be altogether welcome. "You carry cassia oil," Holmes said at once, his voice cool and unhurried. "Not the common essence, but the concentrated extract that passes to the inattentive nose for camphor. Am I correct?" The apothecary blinked, glanced at me as though for relief, and then nodded. "A few phials, sir. For physicians and chemists, mostly. It is not a preparation in popular demand. Holmes's eyes glittered. And yet one was sold recently. To whom? The man shifted uneasily. I could not say without consulting my book. Then consult it. There was no withstanding that tone. The apothecary turned to a ledger and ran his finger down the neat columns. Here, 3 days ago. 1 phial cassia extract, paid in coin, no name left. The gentleman was well dressed, foreign in appearance, perhaps continental. He spoke with precision, as if English were learned late. I recall he wore gloves even indoors. Holmes leaned forward slightly. Did he remark anything in the shop? Any peculiar question? He inquired whether cassia masked other scents as effectively as camphor. I told him it did so, but more subtly. He seemed satisfied. Excellent. Holmes closed the ledger with a flick of his hand and turned to me as though the matter were settled. Come, Watson. We had gained the street when I pressed him. Holmes, what do you infer? That our stranger, if stranger he was, took pains to mask the presence of a subtler vapor. Cassia disguises the sharper edges of certain alkaloids. Selby may well have inhaled such a preparation under the pretense of relief for his ague. Death in the open air, Watson, wears the mask of natural collapse. I shuddered at the calm certainty of his words. Then the foreign gentleman who purchased the phial is either the man himself or one who equipped him, Holmes interposed. It is not proof, but it is direction. Now we must tie the death to the concession business, for in trade lies the motive. As if in answer, a cab rattled to a halt beside us, and Lestrade sprang down, waving a slip of paper. His thin face bore the excitement of fresh discovery. I've news, Mr. Holmes. Selby had an appointment last night with one Senor Alvarez, a Chilean representative, concerning nitrate concessions. Alvarez lodged at the Belgravia Hotel, but he has not been seen since early evening. His room was found empty this morning. Holmes accepted the paper, which bore the hotel's statement, and read it swiftly. Indeed. Did anyone observe his departure? A porter recalls a cab called at 10:30. Alvarez carried only a small case. He left word he would return, but he has not. Holmes tapped the paper with his forefinger. Then our puzzle begins to declare its outline. A South American concession, a sudden death, and a vanished foreigner. It smacks of intrigue more than of chance. We must see Alvarez's room. The Belgravia Hotel proved a respectable establishment, with crimson carpets and brass fittings polished to a shine. The manager, an anxious man with heavy whiskers, led us to a chamber upon the first floor. It was neat, but too neat, the orderliness of one who packs deliberately rather than departs in haste. Holmes examined the wardrobe, the drawers, the small travelling case that remained. He paused over a blotter upon the desk and held it to the light. Watson, the mirror, if you please. He pressed a sheet against the glass, and the faint reverse of writing emerged. See, Selby 11, South Plane Tree Concession. N. The same hand as the note we found. Alvarez wrote it here before sending it. Then Alvarez is RN? I asked. Holmes's lips thinned. So it appears. But appearances, Watson, are the most treacherous of companions. If he wrote the summons, why then vanish before the hour? And why should he mask a poison with cassia, if his purpose was legitimate business? Lestrade snorted. Because he is guilty, plain and simple. We shall have his description circulated. Holmes ignored the remark. He had moved to the window and was fingering the sill. Observe the flake of blue paint here, fresh from the same ultramarine we found upon Selby's banister and upon our stranger's sleeve. Alvarez rested here before leaving. He leaned, he mused, perhaps he watched. The color binds our scenes together. He turned suddenly, the light in his eyes sharpened. But there is something deeper. The stranger in the square folded his newspaper and left with composure. Would a man bent upon escape behave so? No, he would vanish at once, not tarry in such theatrical calm. This is not merely a fugitive's flight, Watson. It is a role being played. He stooped and retrieved a torn envelope from the wastebasket. The postmark read Liverpool, the hand clumsy. Inside lay only a fragment of printed circular about investments. Yet Holmes studied it with interest. Liverpool is the great gateway to South America. Alvarez may have allies waiting there. Or he may never have gone there at all, and the letter is meant to send us chasing phantoms. We must not follow until the trail grows clearer. Lestrade, restless, tapped his boot upon the carpet. And what do you propose, Mr. Holmes? Holmes slipped the torn envelope into his pocketbook. I propose we return to Baker Street and set a trap. If Alvarez is in flight, his accomplice may yet remain. A man who can sit beside the dead so calmly will not easily abandon the game. He will come again, for such men cannot resist completing their design. When he does, Inspector, we shall be waiting." With that, Holmes swept from the room, his stride brisk, his shoulders squared, as though already in pursuit of an adversary only he could clearly see. I followed, filled with that peculiar mixture of dread and exhilaration which his cases always produced, knowing that the true heart of the mystery had yet to beat its loudest, and that Holmes alone could hear the rhythm beginning to quicken. The fog had begun to lift by the time we regained Baker Street, thinning into ragged wisps that let a pallid sun break through. Holmes strode into our sitting room with an energy that contrasted sharply with the lethargy he had shown earlier that morning. He cast aside his ulster, dropped his stick into the corner, and went at once to the chemical bench near the window. From his pocket he drew the scrap of brown paper taken from Selby's rooms, laid it carefully upon a glass plate, and began testing it with various reagents, humming softly under his breath. I watched the transformation with curiosity, as minute discolorations and vapors rose, and knew from the tension in his narrow shoulders that each reaction was feeding his mind. At length he straightened. As I suspected, the file wrapped in this paper held not mere camphor, Watson, but a volatile preparation of hydrocyanic derivative, its scent faintly masked by cassia. One inhalation, prolonged under guise of medicine, could arrest the heart without a mark. Our dead commission agent was murdered with scientific elegance. I could not repress a shiver, and Alvarez, if indeed he wrote the summons, is implicated. Holmes's expression was one of distaste. Implicated, perhaps, but not proved. You must recall, Watson, the constable's testimony. The stranger sat by the corpse, calm as a sentinel, and spoke of illness, not death. Does that strike you as the behavior of a man fresh from administering poison? It might, I answered, though without conviction. Perhaps he was resolved to carry his part to the end. Holmes shook his head. No, guilt recoils from proximity. Our stranger exhibited composure without fear, as though his presence was itself intended to be seen. The murder was meant to appear as illness, yes, but why then provide a witness who behaves so unnaturally? No, Watson, there is a layer beneath. Before I could press him further, a knock came at the door and Mrs. Hudson entered bearing a telegram. Holmes tore it open with a long finger and read swiftly. His eyes gleamed. From Lestrade. The Yard has traced Alvarez's cabman of last night. He drove the Chilean to Victoria Station shortly after 10. The man took a ticket for Liverpool, but whether he boarded the train is uncertain. This, Watson, is valuable indeed. Do you mean to follow to Liverpool? I asked. Not yet. The scent is too well laid. If Alvarez wished us to believe he fled north, then the truth lies elsewhere. We must wait until the fox shows his brush. He rang for Mrs. Hudson, requesting that the morning papers be delivered at once. When they arrived, he pored over them with a magnifying lens, not reading so much as scanning, until he gave a satisfied exclamation. Note this small advertisement, tucked beneath the shipping reports. To end, the concession prospers. The circle is safe. Wait in the accustomed square. No name, no address. An insertion for a confidant. And mark the curious phrasing. The circle is safe. What circle, Watson? Not a financial one alone, I think. Then the stranger will return, I ventured, undoubtedly. Such signals are not cast idly. He expects to be reassured or directed, and so we must arrange to be at the square when he comes. That evening, therefore, found us again beneath the plane trees of Eccleston Square, with Lestrade lurking discreetly at the corner, and 2 plainclothesmen posted at intervals along the path. The fog had thickened once more, yellow with the reflection of gas lamps, and the benches lay in shadow. Holmes and I seated ourselves upon the very slat where Selby had met his fate. My companion, far from idle, was keenly observant, though his manner was one of almost languid indifference. He drew from his pocket a matchbox, idly struck one upon the bench and let it fall extinguished at his feet. Her signal, I realized suddenly, imitating the fragment we had found earlier. Minutes passed, slow as the dragging mist. Then, from the Chester Street side, a figure approached. He walked with composure, coat collar turned up, gloved hands folded behind his back. As he neared, Holmes inclined his head to me the merest fraction, and I recognized the description given by the constable, the moustache, the lowered gaze, the precise gait. The stranger. He paused when he saw us as though considering. Then he advanced, sat quietly upon the bench's far end and opened a folded newspaper. His presence was deliberate, his calm more startling than any display of guilt. For a space none of us spoke. Only the rustle of paper broke the silence. Holmes leaned slightly toward him. "You are punctual," he said softly. The man's hands did not tremble, nor did his eyes lift from the print. He replied in measured tones, his accent faint but present. "It is well to keep an appointment, even with strangers." Holmes's voice carried an edge of steel. "Albert Selby is dead. You sat beside him. Why?" The stranger folded the paper precisely, laid it upon his knee, and at last turned his face toward us. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly unafraid. "Because no man should depart alone when he has been betrayed. I was witness, not agent." Lestrade, who had crept forward, burst out, "You'll tell that at the Yard. You're under arrest." But Holmes raised a hand, restraining him. His gaze upon the man was keen, calculating. "Betrayed, you say? By whom?" "By Alvarez," the man replied quietly. "He lured Selby here with promises of a fair bargain, then poisoned him under guise of remedy. I sat with him as he died, to mark the treachery and to ensure the truth would not be buried. That is my role, Mr. Holmes, to watch." There was a silence, broken only by the hiss of the fog against the lamps. I felt a chill deeper than the night air, for the man's composure was unnerving, his words deliberate, yet they rang with a sincerity hard to counterfeit. Holmes did not speak at once, but his eyes burned with the fire of deduction, and I knew that he had already begun to weave this new revelation into the intricate pattern forming within his mind. The stranger's words lingered in the damp air like the echo of a tolling bell. Lestrade, unwilling to lose momentum, stepped forward, his hand half raised as though to seize the man by the shoulder. Yet Holmes's glance checked him, firm and decisive. I had learned to trust that glance, for it meant that my companion's mind had already leapt 3 steps ahead. The stranger remained immobile, his dark eyes holding Holmes's with a steadiness that seemed both a challenge and a plea. "You name Alvarez as traitor and poisoner," Holmes said at last, his tone even. "Yet you do not flee nor conceal yourself, nor deny your own presence. That is curious, sir, most curious." The man inclined his head the merest fraction. "Curious, perhaps, but true. I was sent to London not to kill but to observe. When Selby fell, I fulfilled my duty. His death will not be passed over as accident while I yet breathe." Lestrade's lips tightened. "That is noble talk for a fellow skulking in fog beside corpses. Your name, sir?" The stranger's eyes flickered, and for the first time I detected hesitation. "You may call me Navarro. Chilean?" Holmes asked quickly. "By allegiance, yes. But nationality is of little moment. What matters is that Alvarez acts not for Chile but for himself. He deals with concessions as a gambler deals with cards, marked and for his own hand. Selby trusted him too far." Holmes tapped the ferrule of his stick against the slat of the bench, the rhythm deliberate. "And your proof?" Navarro spread his gloved hands upon his knees. "Proof lies in the papers Alvarez carried. Concessions signed in Selby's name that he never read. Contracts binding more than he realized. They were in Alvarez's case last evening. He brought Selby here to make him affix the final signature. The poison was but the quicker pen. The words delivered with such composure chilled me more than any melodrama could have done." Lestrade gave a short laugh of disbelief, yet it rang hollow in the heavy fog. Holmes, however, regarded Navarro with that peculiar intensity I knew so well, the look of a man weighing not only words but tone, posture, the minutiae of truth's disguise. "You are consistent, Navarro," he said at last, "but consistency may be rehearsed. Why did you not remain to denounce Alvarez openly? Why leave the constable with no more than a cryptic encounter?" A faint smile touched the stranger's lips. "Because the Yard arrests first and questions later. I should have shared Selby's fate before sunrise, though by rope rather than by vapor. No, Mr. Holmes, I preferred to wait for one who sees." Holmes inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgment of the compliment, though not of belief. "Very well. You shall wait in safer company tonight. Lestrade, the man is not to be taken to the Yard as common criminal. Let him remain in discreet custody until I have traced Alvarez's path. If Navarro speaks truth, Alvarez is the quarry. If falsehood, then Navarro himself is the snare." Lestrade grumbled but complied, signaling one of his men to lead the stranger away with watchful eyes. Navarro rose calmly, folded his newspaper with precision, and departed between them without resistance, as if confident that time itself would prove him right. We returned to Baker Street in silence. Holmes, sunk deep in his thoughts, smoked furiously, the blue clouds wreathing his sharp features in shadow. At last he broke forth, "It grows intricate, Watson. Alvarez summons Selby to the square, intending fraud and perhaps murder. Navarro appears neither ally nor foe, but witness. And now Alvarez is gone toward Liverpool, or pretends so. If he truly fled north, he must have companions there. If not, he lies somewhere in London drawing breath in another's chamber. We must determine which before dawn," I ventured. "Surely the advertisement in the paper suggests Alvarez remains in London. Who else would reassure Navarro that the circle is safe?" Holmes's eyes flashed. "Just so. That word circle holds the key. It is not a phrase of finance. It is a brotherhood, Watson, a coterie. These concession intrigues have long been fertile ground for secret societies. I must know which circle claims Alvarez's allegiance." He rose abruptly, rang the bell, and when Mrs. Hudson appeared, requested she send for a boy of the Baker Street irregulars. Within the hour, a small figure in tattered cap and keen eyes presented himself. Holmes gave him a coin and instructions whispered so low I caught only fragments. "Belgravia Hotel. Porter, baggage room. Name Alvarez. Follow the case." The lad nodded with solemn cunning and vanished into the night. "Meanwhile," Holmes said, turning back to me, "we shall ourselves visit the Foreign Office. I have a contact there who keeps watch upon these concession schemes. If Alvarez is part of a wider game, his name will already be marked. It was close upon midnight when we were admitted to a dim office in Whitehall, where a weary clerk, summoned from his bed, laid before Holmes a portfolio of papers. By lamplight, we examined letters intercepted between South American agents and London financiers. Twice the name Alvarez appeared, linked with phrases of suspicion, reckless promises, circle of nitrate men, scheme dangerous to honourable houses. Holmes closed the portfolio with a decisive snap. "There, Watson. The circle is no metaphor. It is the circle of nitrate, a clandestine ring of speculators who enrich themselves by fraud and betrayal. Alvarez is their emissary. Selby, drawn in, became inconvenient. He was removed. Navarro, perhaps of rival allegiance, sought only to expose. The pattern clears. As we stepped once more into the chill night, Holmes's stride was quick and certain. We returned to Baker Street, for the irregular will bring news before dawn. Alvarez is either upon the midnight train to Liverpool, or in some safe house of his circle here in London. Whichever it is, I intend to know before the gas lamps fade." I followed, my heart beating with the certainty that the case had entered its sharpest turn, and that the fog still concealed more than one hidden adversary, waiting to step into the light. We reached Baker Street with the hour creeping toward 2, the lamps along Oxford Street guttering low, and the city sunk into that strange hush which belongs only to London after midnight. Holmes's restlessness betrayed itself in every motion, his rapid pacing, his quick glances at the clock, his impatient tapping of fingers against the mantel. I had seen him in such moods before, the intellect ablaze, the body straining for its chance to act. At length a light knock sounded, and the ragged boy Holmes had dispatched slipped into the room, his face flushed with cold and excitement. Holmes bent over him like a hawk stooping upon its prey. "Well?" "I found the cabby, sir, just as you said. He swore he took Alvarez to Victoria Station. But I went into the baggage room, and there's his case still waiting, left behind. Labelled for Liverpool, true, but never claimed. And," here the boy's grin spread wide, "the porter says a gentleman matching his look came back an hour later, slipped him a shilling to keep mum, and went out by the side door into Grosvenor Place. Never boarded no train." Holmes's hand fell upon the boy's shoulder with rare approval. "Excellent. There is your sovereign, and worth every penny. You have done well." The lad pocketed his reward and darted away, leaving us with silence more charged than before. Holmes stood motionless, his eyes half closed, then suddenly struck his palm upon the table. "It is as I thought, Watson. Alvarez never fled north. The circle spread that scent for fools to follow. He is here in London still, hidden among his confederates. The abandoned luggage is the clearest confession. He meant us to waste precious days chasing trains while he secured his scheme." "And Navarro's tale?" I asked. "Is it then to be believed?" Holmes resumed his pacing, his voice low and rapid. "Navarro spoke of betrayal, of Alvarez's fraud. His words align with the evidence from the Foreign Office papers. Yet belief, Watson, is dangerous. I trust no man's story until facts confirm it. But this much is certain. Alvarez is still within our net, and if we cast it swiftly, we may draw him in. We had scarce settled into our chairs again when Lestrade arrived, his coat damp from the lingering mist, his sharp features tight with vexation. "My men report Liverpool bare as a bone," he said. "No, Alvarez, no trace beyond the porter's word. What's your verdict, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes regarded him with something between amusement and disdain. "My dear Inspector, while your men were galloping after shadows, Alvarez was no further than a cab's drive away. He is even now in hiding, perhaps in communication with the Circle. We must close upon him before he learns that Navarro is in our hands." Lestrade's eyes narrowed. "Then where do you place him?" Holmes turned to the window, where the lamps outside cast pale streaks upon the curtains. "Consider, Inspector. The ultramarine paint we traced from Selby's banister to Alvarez's coat. Common enough upon interiors, yes, but fresh, unmistakable. We found it also upon the sill of Alvarez's hotel chamber. Where in London has such painting been lately done? I recall a house in Belgravia, newly let to foreign tenants, its balustrades still wet with colour. It lies but a street from Eccleston Square. Alvarez need not flee far when safety waits at a neighbour's hearth." Lestrade gave a short grunt. "Then, by thunder, we'll search it at once." Holmes held up a hand. "Not so. If we march in openly, Alvarez will vanish through some back stair as easily as a wisp of smoke. No, we must draw him forth. The Circle communicates by signal, as the advertisement proved. If I insert a message into tomorrow's paper, one calculated to tempt him into showing himself, we may bring him into the open." "And what message is that?" I asked. Holmes's thin lips curved in a faint smile. "Something in the vein of their own cant. To end, the matter is exposed. Meet at the accustomed tree at 10, alone. It will suggest betrayal within their circle, yet also hold the bait of safety. Alvarez, anxious and suspicious, will not resist coming to judge for himself. There, under watch, we shall have him." Lestrade rubbed his hands with satisfaction. "It's a trap worth setting." The arrangements were swiftly made. Holmes himself penned the brief note and sent it by messenger to the newspaper's night desk. Then he settled back into his chair, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his face. Yet, though he closed his eyes, I knew he did not sleep. His mind raced onward, weaving each fragment of evidence into the fabric of deduction. Morning came grey and chill. We broke our fast quickly, and by 9 o'clock Holmes, Lestrade and I were once more upon the familiar path of Eccleston Square. Plainclothesmen lay scattered like shadows at the edges, and we three took our places where sightlines gave advantage. The South Plane tree stood sombre in the fog, its bench mute witness to death and to deception. Holmes leaned close. "Watch carefully, Watson. The man who comes may not be Alvarez himself, but a delegate. It will be in the small gestures, the coat sleeve, the fold of paper, that truth declares itself." We waited in silence, the mist thickening, each sound magnified, the distant clip of hooves, the muffled call of a milkman, the rustle of leaves overhead. Then at last a figure emerged from the haze. He walked briskly, coat collar high, hat pressed low, and carried beneath his arm a folded newspaper. My heart quickened, for his stride bore the same measured precision the constable had described of the stranger. Holmes's hand tightened upon my sleeve. "Steady, Watson. The play begins." The man approached the bench, paused as though considering, then sat with deliberate calm. He unfolded the paper, though his eyes scarcely moved across its print. We could not yet see his face clearly, but Holmes's gaze sharpened to a needlepoint. "Note, Watson, the glove, faint stain of ultramarine. We have him." And even as he spoke, the figure lifted his head, and in the dim light I caught the clean-shaven face, the narrow moustache, and the eyes that at last met ours full on. Alvarez had returned to the scene of his crime, and Holmes's trap was closing fast. Alvarez's gaze lingered on us only for a heartbeat, before sliding away with a studied indifference, as though three men waiting in a fog-damp square were of no more consequence than pigeons on a cornice. He settled back against the bench, opened his newspaper, and crossed one leg over the other, the picture of casual composure. Yet I caught the faint tautness of his jaw, and Holmes's sharp intake of breath told me he had observed the same. Lestrade shifted beside me, eager to rush forward, But Holmes's hand shot out like a vice on his arm. "Not yet, Inspector. Let him believe himself unwatched. He will reveal more in the safety of his own arrogance." We lingered in the shadows as the minutes ticked by. Alvarez occasionally turned a page, though his eyes scarcely glanced at the print. Twice he glanced up the path toward Chester Street, as though expecting another arrival, and once he tapped the ferrule of his cane lightly against the gravel in what struck me as a signal. Holmes's lips curved faintly, and I knew he had registered each gesture as part of some larger cipher. At last Alvarez folded the paper and rose. He moved toward the plane tree, where the bark bore a faint notch from years of lovers' knives. With a swift motion he slipped a small folded slip between two crevices in the trunk, then turned on his heel to depart. "Now, Lestrade," Holmes whispered. The inspector sprang forward, his men closing in from either side. Alvarez started, the mask of indifference faltering for the first time. He glanced about, but the fog denied him escape. Within seconds he was ringed by constables, his cane knocked from his grasp, his gloved hands seized. "This is outrageous," he cried in a voice thick with foreign intonation, yet perfectly articulate. "By what right do you lay hands on me?" "By the right of murder," Lestrade snapped. "Albert Selby lies in the morgue, poisoned by your trickery." Alvarez's eyes blazed with sudden fire, but his tone grew icy. "I am no murderer. If Selby is dead, it was not by my hand. You English police chase shadows. English police chase shadows." Holmes stepped forward then, his presence commanding silence even among the constables. He stooped to the tree, drew forth the hidden slip, and unfolded it with delicate fingers. His eyes flickered across the words, and a grim smile touched his lips. "Observe, Watson. The message reads, 'The circle moves tonight. Bring the documents, N.' You see the neatness of it. Alvarez is not fleeing. He is arranging his final act. The circle of nitrate convenes this very night." Alvarez made to snatch the paper, but Holmes's long arm held it easily beyond his reach. "Impatience, sir, betrays guilt. This hand is your own, is it not?" For the first time Alvarez faltered, color draining from his cheeks. Yet he rallied quickly. "You twist what you do not understand. I came only for business, honorable business. Selby knew the risks. His weakness killed him." Holmes's voice rang cold as steel. "Weakness does not leave cassia upon a man's hat brim, nor paint of ultramarine upon his sleeve, nor contracts forged with invisible ink. Your web is too intricate for denial, Alvarez." Lestrade wasted no more words. With a curt order, his men led Alvarez away in custody, their forms melting into the fog with the prisoner struggling between them. Holmes remained by the plane tree, his fingers lightly tracing the bark as though reading some code invisible to the rest of us. "Do you believe his denial?" I asked at length. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A man's protestations are the least of evidence, Watson. His very calm condemns him. And yet," he paused, his brow furrowed, "there remains Navarro. If Alvarez is guilty, what role does Navarro play? Informant, rival, or something darker? Until I know, the case is unfinished." We returned to Baker Street with Alvarez lodged securely under Lestrade's guard. The fire was burning low, and Holmes threw himself into his armchair with the weariness that comes not from exertion, but from thought too long sustained. He lit his pipe, sending great clouds upward, his eyes narrowed in reflection. "You perceive, Watson," he said at last, "that Alvarez's slip betrayed more than he intended. The circle moves tonight. That suggests a gathering, one vital to their scheme. If we can intercept it, the entire structure collapses. Yet time is short and the place uncertain. I ventured that the tree itself might be the rendezvous, but Holmes shook his head. No, the tree is but their letterbox. The true meeting will be elsewhere, somewhere secure, known only to initiates. But there is a clue hidden in the wording. Bring the documents. Which documents? Clearly the contracts forged in Selby's name. Alvarez must believe them still accessible. Where then are they? He sprang up suddenly, every line of his figure alive again with purpose. Of course. In his abandoned luggage at Victoria. A ruse, yes, but one meant for us to overlook. The papers are there, and tonight he would have retrieved them under cover of darkness. Without further word, we hailed a cab and drove at once to the station. By special order of Lestrade, the baggage room was opened to us. Holmes examined the valise marked with Alvarez's name. Its lock yielded easily to his deft fingers. Inside lay a sheaf of contracts, their pages bearing Selby's forged signature. as well as letters of credit that, had they been acted upon, might have ruined firms and governments alike. Holmes's eyes shone as he leafed through them. This, Watson, is dynamite in paper. Here lies the motive, millions at stake in nitrate concessions. Selby discovered too late, and for that discovery he was silenced. Alvarez is no solitary schemer. He is but one claw of the circle. If we would strike the beast, we must find where it gathers. He held up one letter in particular, written in cipher. For several minutes he worked upon it, pencil scratching furiously across a scrap of paper. At last he leaned back, triumphant. There! It names an address in Chelsea. A warehouse by the river. Tonight, Watson, the circle convenes there. If fortune favours, we shall take them all in their lair. The cab bore us back through the lamplit streets, the fog curling like smoke about the wheels. Holmes's face, sharp in the dim light, held that peculiar gleam I had come to know so well, the certainty of a hunter at the very heels of his quarry. And, for my own part, I felt the weight of the night pressing upon me, knowing that before it ended, we would stand in the midst of men who dealt not in lives alone but in empires, and that our task was to unmask them before they struck again. The fog along the river clung to us like damp wool as the cab set us down in Chelsea. The lamps burned faintly through the murk, their glow swallowed by the mist, and the warehouses loomed as hulking shadows along the embankment. Holmes stepped lightly onto the cobblestones, his eyes alive, scanning the darkened windows and silent doors. I followed with unease, my heart thudding with the knowledge that we were stepping into the very heart of the conspiracy. The warehouse in question crouched at the bend of a narrow lane, its brick walls glistening with damp, its great doors secured with a heavy bar. Holmes motioned me to silence and circled the building, his steps soundless upon the wet stones. At the rear, he discovered a smaller door, its frame softened by age. He knelt, drew out his slender tools, and within moments the lock yielded. We slipped into darkness, the air thick with the smell of tar, rope, and river silt. Holmes guided me with a hand upon my sleeve until our eyes adjusted to the faint light filtering through the high, dust-filmed windows. Shapes loomed in the gloom, crates, coils of cable, and the black outline of a long table set with papers and lamps ready to be lit. Holmes crouched beside it, his hand hovering over a scatter of documents. With the faintest smile he whispered, "We are not too late. The circle convenes here tonight." We concealed ourselves behind a stack of crates at the far end, from where we commanded a clear view of the table and the doors. The silence pressed heavily upon us, broken only by the faint lap of water against the quay. Then, slowly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the lane outside. A key grated in the lock. The door creaked open. One by one they entered, 4 men cloaked and muffled, their faces shadowed by hats. Alvarez was among them, his bearing unmistakable, though his hands were now unbound. Clearly his release had been contrived by accomplices within the circle, or else he had slipped the yard's net by means not yet known to us. My hand clenched in alarm, but Holmes pressed me back into silence, his expression composed, though his eyes glittered with intensity. The men gathered about the table, lighting the lamps, their voices low but urgent. I caught fragments, the words "contract, Liverpool line, Selby's silence." One of them produced a map, spreading it open with the precision of men long practiced in secret dealings. Alvarez leaned across it, pointing with sharp gestures, his voice more insistent than the rest. Holmes, his keen ears straining, nodded faintly as though each syllable were another piece sliding into his mental mosaic. At last one of the men, tall, with a voice deep and commanding, spoke words that rang even in the hush of the warehouse. "With Selby gone, the last obstacle falls. Tomorrow the signatures pass as genuine, and the concession is ours." The others murmured assent. I felt my stomach clench, for here was confirmation beyond doubt of Selby's murder and the motive behind it. Holmes shifted, preparing to spring, but then his hand stilled. His eyes were fixed upon Alvarez, who had withdrawn slightly from the group. With measured calm, Alvarez spoke. "You claim the concession, but you do not hold it. The papers are not in your keeping. They lie with the English detective who even now threads your trail. Did you think I would not see through your betrayal? You would sacrifice me as you sacrificed Selby, but I have preserved myself." A sudden silence followed, tense as a drawn wire. The tall man's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "What do you mean?" Alvarez drew from his coat a folded sheet. "This is my safeguard. It names each of you and binds you to Selby's death. Should I fall, it will find its way to the authorities. Even Holmes himself may yet read it. So you see, gentlemen, I am not your pawn, but your partner. The effect was electric. The men stiffened, their hands twitching toward pockets, their eyes glittering with anger and fear. Holmes leaned close to me, his whisper scarcely audible. Do you see, Watson? Navarro spoke truth. Alvarez's treachery reaches even his comrades. But now we must act, or blood will flow. Before I could reply, Holmes rose from concealment, tall and unflinching, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. You need not trouble yourselves, gentlemen. The authorities already know. The game is over. Chaos erupted. The men cried out, overturning the table, papers scattering like startled birds. Alvarez leapt back, his hand flying to a concealed revolver. Holmes's whistle pierced the din, shrill and sharp. At once the warehouse doors burst open, and Lestrade and his men stormed in, truncheons raised, voices commanding. I caught a glimpse of Alvarez's pistol glinting in the lamplight, aimed full at Holmes. Instinct overbore reason. I flung myself forward, grappling his arm. The shot rang out, the bullet striking sparks from the iron rail. The struggle was fierce, Alvarez strong and desperate, but Lestrade's men were upon him in an instant. He was disarmed, dragged back snarling like a wild beast caught in a net. Beast caught in a net. Beast. The others, seeing the trap close, attempted flight, but constables blocked every exit. A brief melee followed, the clang of blows and the crash of crates resounding in the cavernous chamber. Within minutes all were subdued, their plots broken, their circle shattered. Holmes stood amid the wreckage, his face pale but alight, surveying the scene with that strange calm of a man whose deductions had been vindicated. He stooped to gather the scattered documents, tucking them neatly into his case. Then he turned to Lestrade, whose hat was askew and whose coat bore the marks of the scuffle. You see, Inspector, the strength of a circle lies only in its secrecy. Once that veil is pierced, it collapses under its own corruption. Selby was their victim, Alvarez their blade, but London shall be their prison. Lestrade, puffing, could only nod. By heavens, Mr. Holmes, I'll not forget this night. Scotland Yard owes you more than I can say. Holmes's gaze softened for a moment as it met mine. Come, Watson. There will be time for reports and formalities later. For now, let us leave this den of shadows and return to the morning light. We have work yet to do, the truth must be told, and Navarro's fate still lies undecided. And so, as the constables marched their prisoners away, and the river mist curled once more about the lamplight, Holmes and I stepped into the night, the echoes of the struggle still ringing in my ears, knowing that the final answers lay not only in victory, but in the reckoning still to come. We returned to Baker Street as dawn broke over London, the pale light filtering through the fog like a ghost reluctant to depart. The clatter of the constables escorting their prisoners had faded behind us, and the streets were near deserted save for a scattering of milkmen and the first hansom cabs of the day. Holmes walked swiftly, his head bent, his long strides carrying him as though the city itself might fall away if he slowed. I knew that in his mind the case was not yet complete. The circle had been broken, Alvarez unmasked, but questions still clung like burrs to the truth. Inside our rooms, Holmes cast his cloak aside and threw the bundle of seized papers upon the table. He dropped into his chair, steepled his fingers and closed his eyes. I had learned not to disturb him in such moments, when the tumult of events gathered into order within his brain. For myself, I busied my hands with tea, though my own thoughts churned no less violently. The memory of Alvarez's revolver, the echo of that shot, still stirred unease within me. Had I been slower, Holmes's brilliance might have ended upon that warehouse floor. At length he stirred. Watson, there is a loose thread, Navarro. The name fell into the silence like a stone into still water. I nodded, for I too had not forgotten the grave-eyed man who claimed to be no more than a witness. Do you believe him innocent, Holmes? Innocent, perhaps, but not idle. He sat beside the dead to bear witness, so he said, but one does not risk the noose merely for conscience. He plays his own game. Until we learn for whom he works, we have but half the truth. As though summoned by the words, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson admitted Lestrade, weary but triumphant. He carried papers in his hand, and the satisfaction of a man who knows he has delivered a great blow against crime. They're lodged in cells, everyone, he said. Alvarez most of all. We'll have the case tried in the assizes before the month is out. Holmes inclined his head politely. You have done well, Inspector. Yet I would urge caution. These men are but the visible points of the circle. There may be others hidden deeper, who will not rest until their profits are saved. Lestrade frowned. Perhaps. But London will sleep easier with Alvarez behind bars. He hesitated, then added, "And what of Navarro? My superiors ask whether he is to be charged. He protests innocence, claims to have aided you. What say you, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes rose and paced before the hearth. "Navarro sits at the heart of our puzzle. Release him without thought, and we may unleash another peril. Yet treat him as criminal without proof, and we may betray an ally. No, Inspector. Let him be brought here under guard. I would question him myself." An hour later, Navarro stood once more in our sitting room, guarded by a constable, his bearing calm despite his captivity. He inclined his head to Holmes, his dark eyes steady. "So, Mr. Holmes, the circle falls. You have accomplished what I could not." Holmes regarded him keenly. "So you speak as if you were against them from the first." Navarro's lips curved faintly. "I was sent by men who fear the circle's corruption. Not Scotland Yard, not your government, but men across the seas whose fortunes would be ruined by Alvarez's treachery. My orders were to watch, to gather proof. I did not strike because my task was not to kill, but to see. Yet when Selby died, I could not let the truth vanish with him. So I stayed. I sat by him that others might know he did not die alone, nor without witness." Lestrade snorted. "A fine tale. But how are we to believe it?" Holmes moved closer, his gaze never wavering. "Your proof, Navarro. You must have brought some token, some means of verifying your allegiance. Produce it." Slowly, Navarro drew from his coat a folded letter, its seal bearing a crest unknown to me, but which Holmes studied with interest. "This is from the Ministry of Commerce in Santiago," Navarro said quietly. "It names me as agent against those who would defraud Chilean interests. You may read it." Holmes examined the paper with his lens, sniffed the ink, even tested the fibers against the light. At last he nodded. "It is genuine. Your story, Navarro, holds. You are no murderer, yet your conduct was reckless, sitting with Selby, withholding your knowledge. You risked much." Navarro's dark eyes softened. "I risked myself, yes, but I spared Selby's name. Had I shouted murder in the night, his death would have been dismissed as delirium of a foreigner. Better that a man of your repute should uncover it." For the first time, Holmes's severe expression eased. "You speak truth, I think. Very well. Inspector, Navarro is no prisoner. He is a witness, and a valuable one. Treat him so." Lestrade bristled, but seeing Holmes's certainty, acquiesced. "As you will. But if he slips, the yard will not thank me." When they had gone, Holmes stood long at the window, watching the fog dissolve into pale daylight. At last he spoke, his tone softer than before. "It is a curious thing, Watson, that a man may sit beside death not as killer nor as friend, but as sentinel. Navarro is such a man. And yet, though Alvarez and his fellows are captured, I suspect the circle is not wholly broken. Their schemes reach far beyond London. Today we have cut one branch. Tomorrow another may rise." He turned then with that sudden flicker of humour that often followed his most profound reflections. "But for now, Watson, I shall allow myself the luxury of breakfast. You will forgive me if I say that after a night among nitrate conspirators, for even Mrs. Hudson's kedgeree holds the savour of triumph." And as he sat, pouring his tea with a hand as steady as if no bullet had grazed him hours before, I marvelled once again at the man, tireless, enigmatic, his mind moving always beyond the present victory to the shadows of battles yet to come. Holmes had scarcely finished his kedgeree when another knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson, with some alarm in her eyes, admitted a uniformed messenger who bore an envelope stamped with the seal of the Foreign Office. Holmes slit it open with his knife, scanned the contents, and whistled softly. He passed it across to me, and I read that the Chilean legation had formally acknowledged Navarro's service and requested that he be granted safe passage out of England. The note concluded with a request that all documents seized from Alvarez be delivered under seal to the government for review. Holmes leaned back, his long fingers steepled. "So, Watson, Navarro is vindicated. The legation claims him, and his mission is justified. Yet this message confirms what I feared, that the Circle's operations were wider than we have glimpsed. Governments themselves stir behind the veil. I asked if this meant the case was concluded." Holmes shook his head. "Concluded for Scotland Yard, perhaps. For myself, I desire certainty. There remains a question that needles me. Why Alvarez sat so calmly in the square when Selby breathed his last? Was it confidence? Arrogance? Or was there yet another hand guiding him? Before I could reply, Lestrade was announced, his manner brimming with official satisfaction. He congratulated Holmes on the success of the warehouse raid and declared that Alvarez and his accomplices would be brought swiftly to trial. "We have their papers, their signatures, even Navarro's testimony," he said. "The Crown's case is iron. Case is iron." Holmes regarded him with a faint smile. "Iron, Inspector, may bend if struck at the right angle. Beware. The Circle's wealth may purchase much. Lawyers, influence, delays. Watch carefully, or you may find your prisoner vanished between jail and court." Lestrade flushed but admitted the warning had merit. He promised vigilance, then departed to prepare his charges, leaving Holmes once more to his thoughts. The day wore on, and London stirred back into its accustomed rhythm, carriages clattering and street cries rising beneath our window. Yet Holmes remained by the fire, studying again the contracts recovered from Alvarez's valise. He handled them not as mere evidence but as ciphers, reading the subtle variations in hand, the pressure of the pen, the arrangement of clauses. "Observe here. Watson," he said suddenly, pointing to a margin note, "this scrawl is not Alvarez's hand. It belongs to another, a financier here in London, I suspect. Alvarez was the agent, not the author. The true brain lies elsewhere." I was about to answer when a commotion arose in the street below. The sound of running feet, a cry, and the wheels of a cab rattling off at reckless speed. Mrs. Hudson hurried in, breathless. "Mr. Holmes, sir, there's been trouble. 2 men from the yard, those set to guard your Alvarez. They were struck down near the Old Bailey. And the prisoner's gone." Holmes sprang up, his eyes blazing with sudden fire. "Gone, Watson." Did I not foretell it? The Circle's hand is long indeed. Quick, there is still time. Within minutes we were in a cab of our own, Holmes urging the driver on with sharp commands. We reached the scene near the Old Bailey, where a small crowd had gathered. 2 constables lay dazed but alive, their skulls bloodied. They told a confused tale of a sudden attack by masked men, swift and silent, who had dragged Alvarez into a waiting carriage. The assailants had vanished into the fog-bound streets before pursuit could be organized. Holmes examined the ground with the lantern's light, his keen eyes missing nothing. He stooped, lifting a scrap of cloth torn from a glove, stained faintly with blue. "Ultramarine again, Watson. It is their signature." Alvarez is returned to his masters. The constables muttered curses, but Holmes only straightened, his expression grim yet controlled. "They will think themselves victorious. They believe Alvarez safe, but in truth they have but drawn tighter the noose. For we know now that the Circle protects him, and wherever they move him they leave their mark. Come, we must anticipate, not follow." We returned to Baker Street under the cloak of night. Holmes paced the room like a caged hawk, then stopped suddenly. "The Circle has 2 necessities, shelter and secrecy. They dare not move Alvarez far, nor can they risk the country roads with patrols alerted. He will be concealed in some trusted house here in London, one already painted with their colour. And there is but one such place I have traced, the house in Belgravia, whose balustrade left paint upon Selby's banister and Alvarez's sleeve. It is there he will be found." Without pause he summoned Lestrade by urgent note, bidding him muster his men at once. By midnight we were before the Belgravia house, its windows dark, its door silent. Holmes signalled, and Lestrade's men surrounded it. The lock yielded beneath Holmes's deft fingers, and we entered. The silence within was oppressive, the air heavy with stale tobacco and the faint, unmistakable tang of chemical oils. Holmes moved swiftly, each step sure. He opened a door upon the 2nd floor, and there, bound to a chair but very much alive, sat Alvarez. His eyes blazed with fury as we entered, though his composure soon returned. Holmes regarded him coolly. "You are a difficult man to keep caged, Alvarez, but the cage has found you again." Papers lay scattered upon the desk beside him, hurriedly abandoned, fresh contracts, names, signatures, evidence of plots yet unborn. Holmes gathered them swiftly, his expression one of grim satisfaction. Lestrade ordered the prisoner secured once more, this time with doubled guard. As they led him away, Holmes lingered in the room, his gaze fixed upon the blue smear of paint upon the balustrade. He touched it lightly, then turned to me with a rare gravity. You see, Watson, how a trail may begin with the faintest stain and end with the unraveling of empires. Selby's death was but the stone that stirred the waters, yet through its ripples we have glimpsed the shape of a monstrous hand. Tonight we have struck at it, but I do not deceive myself, the circle still coils in shadow. Only time will tell if we have cut deep enough. And as dawn once more touched the London roofs with pallid light, I knew the case was not only one of murder, but of forces vast and unseen, against which even Holmes's brilliance shone like a single fierce lamp in an ocean of fog. The trial that followed was the talk of London for weeks, for never had the courts handled a case in which commerce, politics and murder were so intricately bound together. Alvarez, confronted with the forged contracts, the testimony of Navarro and the damning evidence from the warehouse, stood defiant to the end. Yet his composure could not outweigh the facts. One by one his accomplices turned against him. The circle fractured under the weight of exposure, and the jury's verdict was inevitable. He was sentenced to penal servitude for life, his fortune confiscated, his schemes scattered like ashes in the wind. Navarro, as promised, received safe passage home. Before he departed, he came once more to Baker Street to take his leave. He stood in our sitting room, his dark eyes solemn, and spoke with quiet conviction. "You have given justice not only to Selby, but to those in my country who would have suffered from Alvarez's fraud. I owe you a debt that cannot be measured." Holmes inclined his head but made no flourish of acceptance. "It was not debt, Navarro, but necessity. When truth lies buried, it calls to me as the hound to its master. I did only what must be done." Navarro pressed my hand with warmth and vanished into the London fog, never to cross our path again. Lestrade, for his part, enjoyed a rare moment of triumph at the Yard, though he did not neglect to attribute the lion's share of credit to Holmes, however grudgingly. "I'll not deny it, Mr. Holmes," he said. "Your methods are beyond us. You see where we grope in the dark. But one thing's certain, you've made enemies tonight, enemies with long memories." Holmes smiled thinly, his gaze fixed upon the glow of the fire. "An enemy that hides in shadow is best defeated by light, Inspector. They may slink, they may scheme, but in time the pattern of their movement reveals itself. Until then, London remains our theatre, and the fog its curtain." When at last we were alone, Holmes sank into his chair with the air of a man who has tasted victory, but knows it to be fleeting. I ventured that the circle was broken for good, but he shook his head. "Broken, yes, but not obliterated. The tendrils of corruption run deep, Watson. We have lopped a branch, not uprooted the tree. Yet," and here he allowed himself a rare, quiet satisfaction, "Selby's death has been avenged, and the truth stands clear where once was only deceit. That is enough for now." He reached for his violin then, and as the first strains of a plaintive melody rose in the room, I felt the case draw to its natural close. The smoke from his pipe curled upward, the fire burned low, and the city outside carried on with its endless motion, unaware of how near it had come to ruin. I sat listening, reflecting on all that had passed. The stranger who sat beside the dead, the cryptic notes, the fog-bound square, the warehouse by the river, and finally the unmasking of a circle of men who thought themselves untouchable. Holmes played on, his head bowed, his eyes half closed. At last he lowered the bow, and with that familiar blend of irony and humility remarked, "Another thread, Watson, untangled from the skein. The world will go on weaving its knots, and we shall go on unpicking them. It is, I suppose, our modest contribution to civilization." And so ended the affair of the stranger, who sat beside the dead, a case that began with a silent witness, in a foggy square, and concluded with the exposure of a conspiracy that spanned oceans. To others it was victory, to the Yard it was triumph, but to me it was something more, another glimpse of the brilliance and burden borne by Sherlock Holmes, my friend, whose restless mind never ceased to pierce the darkness with its fierce and unyielding light.